Sejam bem-vindos de volta. Você pode acessar a Wi-Fi aqui dentro com a rede Sul América Telecom, tudo junto, login e senha CMEP 2016. Muito bem, eu gostaria de iniciar agradecendo aos nossos patrocinadores. Patrocínio Diamante, Alelo, Banco do Brasil, Bradesco Cartões, Cielo, Elo, GetNet, Itaú Card, Mastercard, Rede, Santander e Visa. E o patrocínio ouro, Caixa, Citi, HSBC, Ingênico Group, Smiles e Verifone. E o patrocínio prata, Conductor e o apoio Card Monitor. Muito obrigada aos nossos patrocinadores. Eu tenho um recado importante. Caso vocês queiram receber as apresentações do evento, é só entrar no aplicativo do Congresso, clicar em conteúdo do evento, logo após você informa a senha ABEX CMEP, tudo junto e em letras minúsculas, e logo após informe o seu nome, e-mail e empresa, que vocês irão receber os conteúdos das apresentações aqui do Congresso. Muito bem, agora eu gostaria de convidar para abrir a sessão 4, Inovação em Segurança nas Transações Digitais, e apresentar também o nosso palestrante. Eu convido ao palco o diretor de Segurança do Itaú Unibanco, Adriano Volpini. Bem-vindo, Adriano.
Hello everybody, good evening. I will talk in English because Mark will not have the earphone to receive the translation, but you can do all your questions in Portuguese. I will start with the Mark bio, just to introduce him. Mark is the Senior Vice President at Visa Inc., where he is responsible for leading Visa's global product and business intelligence organization, whose teams deliver value across fraud risk, credit risk, and business intelligence solutions. In this role, his focus spans across new technology, new products development, core products management, and product optimization, often including sophisticated solutions serving merchants, acquirer, and client financial institutions. New and existing product solutions under his leadership are commercialized and utilized in critical business functions across more than 200 countries and territories. Please, Mark. Thank you, Mark. It's your show.
It's great to be here. I love being in Brazil. I'm here about once a year, and I've been at Visa for 10 years. And I love coming to Brazil because it's one of the markets where we really see innovation happen in payments. And I speak at a lot of conferences around the world, and generally when I talk, I reference Brazil, and I reference some of the things that are going on in this marketplace. So I thought what I'd do today is actually do the opposite. I'll talk to you a little bit about what's happening in other parts in the world and show how that relates to what you guys are working on as well. Most recently, I was at Mobile World Congress a couple weeks ago in Barcelona, and if anyone has been there, it's it's a huge conference. There's 100,000 people that go to this conference. And a couple big themes this year were it's all things mobile, so Internet of Things, but biometrics was a big topic. And so I thought what we do today is talk a little bit about biometrics, and we'll give our opinion from Visa's point of view, how we see biometrics being deployed around the world, and once again, what is the impact to you guys here in Brazil? And then we'll also touch a little bit on some emerging technologies that we're incorporating into some of the data analytics that are behind the scenes to help our stakeholders better detect and manage fraud as we go. You know, traditionally in payments, we've relied on knowledge-based methods to verify the cardholder, right? So these are examples of PIN or password. You all are familiar with that. But obviously, the mobile device provides new opportunities to use mobile payments, to use biometrics as a way to supplement and replace a PIN or signature or a password. And we're already seeing this today, and I'll give a couple examples of where this is happening. But there are tremendous types of biometrics out there that we can use. And I mean, some of these you're familiar with, such as your face, your voice, your fingerprint, and some of them are emerging, such as your heartbeat, or even the way you walk, or a vein in your eye. So there's a lot of emerging biometric solutions and capabilities out there. What we're doing is looking at, to use this for payments, how accurate is it? And generally we look at a couple of things, like what's the maturity of the technology, what's the uniqueness of the biometric, and how consistently can we capture that biometric every time we want to use it, right? So those are the things we look at. And if you think about some biometrics, like fingerprints have been around for decades, that technology, and they've been refined over this period of time. Some of the newer ones, like heartbeat, it's brand new, and we're still evaluating how can we use heartbeat as a unique trait for biometrics in payments, right? So a lot of technology is coming out there, and the question people ask is, does Visa have a preference? Are we picking a single type of biometric? And the answer from our perspective is no. We think that some biometrics are better in other use cases, but for the most part, we think it's ultimately going to be up to the consumer and the issuers to decide what's the best experience that they want to offer to their consumers. And so our job at Visa is really to help vet the technology and provide guidance, and as well as integration options so that you can incorporate those into your own mobile experiences. So one question people ask is Visa going to have an application, a Visa consumer-branded application? And our answer right now is no. Once again, our strategy is to incorporate the biometric into the issuer's banking app. And that is how the consumers will utilize that technology to gain access to the mobile banking application or to gain access to payments. So that's our strategy. And let's talk about now what is happening around the world from a biometric perspective. And I put this into 3 buckets. There's obviously the first one is mobile, and biometrics are already happening on mobile devices as we speak. And there's a number of different options here. So I'll start with maybe some of the mobile digital payments that started coming out a year ago with Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, and Android Pay. I know those are about to be introduced to some degree in this marketplace. It's still finalizing the details. But for those transactions, I can use my fingerprint as a way to initiate the payment at the point of sale. And that fingerprint is the confirmation that that fingerprint occurred is sent to the terminal. And that terminal then now knows that this cardholder was verified, and it doesn't prompt for PIN. Right? And so today, I think in Brazil, you can do contactless payments up to $50, and if it's over $50, you're probably prompted to enter a PIN. But with a mobile transaction using a Samsung or Android or Apple Pay, that fingerprint would replace the need to enter a PIN even if it's over $50. That's how it's designed. And it's using the existing EMV infrastructure. So this is an example of technology that works globally. So I have an Apple device and I have Apple Pay. I can take it to any terminal in the world that accepts NFC, and that transaction is completed using my biometric. Using my fingerprint initiates the payment, and that's all I need. So we're already seeing biometrics being used in payment as a replacement for PIN or signature in the marketplace. And also, these technologies, these third-party wallets, they're also being used for e-commerce, right? So in an application itself, on your mobile device, you can pay with Samsung Pay or Android Pay or Apple Pay, and once again, you initiate the payment with your fingerprint, and that is now considered a valid cardholder verification, right? So we're starting to see biometrics happen in mobile, and we're going to continue to see this. And around the world, what we are seeing is some of the top issuers, those issuers that have a large development staff and they have leading edge technology, they have been doing a good job of incorporating biometrics into their mobile banking app, right? So as a way to get access to my mobile app, I could use my face, I could use a fingerprint, I could use my voice. And so we're starting to see this happen, and this is happening all around the world, and it's going to continue to happen. And I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of experimenting as to what is the best user experience to gain access to that mobile banking app. And then also, one of the things we're seeing is, do we have multiple apps, right? So do I have an application for mobile banking and a separate application for payments, right? And it's a question a lot of people are struggling with and trying to figure out what is going to be the best experience, right? So that's something that we're going to continue to see our issuers experimenting with all around the world, and it's going to be really interesting times for us. And once again, I think what our role at Visa is to do is to help give guidance to our issuers on types of technology and types of biometrics that are working well in terms of partners, in terms of capabilities, and then helping design what those best user experiences could be, right? So we're going to provide guidance where we can on those experiences, but in reality, the issuers are doing a lot of work trying to get a great experience figured out. So that's mobile, and it's happening now, and it's happening around the world. So let's talk about card, because this is probably the single biggest question people ask is, will we see biometrics being used when you use your payment card itself? And this is where I reference Brazil often, because you're one of the few markets that's actually already using biometrics at the ATM, right? So when you go to get cash out at an ATM, you insert your card and you put a fingerprint or a hand vein on your palm, I should say, on the terminal, right? And that gets you access to funds. But there's really only two markets in the world that are doing that. So it's Japan and Brazil. Really the only two that we've seen mass adoption of that type of technology. So you're one of the leading edges in that particular place. And so the natural question for Brazil is, will we see biometrics at the point of sale, right? So today you still have a terminal where you insert your chip card and you enter your PIN, and that's the terminal. So will we ever see a fingerprint at the point of sale being captured? And it's a big question, and there's a couple of things that will kind of drive this decision. One is we would have to standardize as a country on what is that biometric, because not everyone is doing it the same way. Some banks have the palm being captured, some banks are doing fingerprint. So as a group, we need to decide what is the standard form of verification that we're going to pick. Let's say it's a fingerprint. Then we also need to work with the terminal manufacturers to figure out how can we get the current terminals replaced so that I can now insert and use my fingerprint at the point of sale. And switching out terminals, as you guys know, is not an easy task, right? It takes some time and it's complicated. And so one of the challenges will be simply, how do we actually get that movement started? And what we're looking at in terms of what is a likely scenario would be the government would need to get involved to help fund the initiative for some other purpose. And some other purpose generally means that the government, maybe if they're transmitting funds to a consumer for whatever reasons, for benefits, they often want to make sure that that person that they're distributing funds to is still alive. Because all around the world, there's a lot of fraud from the benefits perspective, whereby the actual consumer has died, but the relatives are still collecting the payments. We see this in many markets. I don't know if that's a specific problem for Brazil, but we have seen governments be interested in using biometrics as a way to validate that that benefit is being properly received and used. And so South Africa is a good example whereby we're working with their government to see how can we implement a biometric at the point of sale, specifically to get that healthcare, not the healthcare, but the benefit card introduced. But that is an example of something that maybe could happen potentially in Brazil as well. But I do think it will take some type of incremental value proposition to justify the expense of switching out the terminals in order to accept that biometric, right? So we have that challenge. Yep.
We had heard something about this type of fraud in other countries, but I think that we don't have it here in Brazil. Can you imagine?
That is weird. This is the first time I've heard about that. That's funny. In terms of the, now I lost what I was going to say. Okay. Let's go back to a world whereby we got the terminals deployed. So now everyone in Brazil is using their fingerprint at the point of sale, right? So you're not entering your PIN anymore. You're using your fingerprint. That's great. But now let's say you want to go to Miami to go to Disney World, and you take out your card and you need to pay, but you won't have a fingerprint reader there because they're not going to be everywhere. In fact, they'll probably just be in a couple of countries around the world. So now you're going to be in the situation where, as a consumer, you're going to have to try to enter this PIN that you haven't used maybe in 6 or 12 months, right? And that becomes an actual challenge, right? That's the same problem the US consumers have with credit cards. Our credit cards have PIN, but we never use them, so nobody remembers them. And so you could potentially be in a similar situation if Brazil is always using fingerprint for domestic, but outside it doesn't work. And that is the reality, because outside of a few markets, we will not see biometrics being used with cards. And the primary reason is because the issuing banks don't have a biometric on file, right? So if I, as a US consumer, when I go and open a debit account or get a credit card, my bank doesn't get my fingerprint. They don't ask for it. They don't have anything on file. And so there's not an easy way to start to load a biometric template onto your chip itself. We don't have the ability to do that. We'd have to start from scratch. But that's nearly every market in the world. There's only a few markets whereby the issuing bank has a biometric on file, and Brazil is one, right? South Africa is one, Singapore, India, there's a handful, but most markets don't have it, which means it will be very difficult to deploy at scale that type of technology. So we are not predicting we will see in the foreseeable future everyone using a fingerprint at the point of sale. Right? So it's something for Brazil to consider as you look at your long-term payment roadmap. Do you go down a biometric at the point of sale, recognizing that's going to largely be a domestic Brazil experience, and that same experience you won't be able to replicate when you travel, right? So that's card. Now let's talk about the third option, and this one is a little bit interesting, but it's using yourself your biometric to identify who you are, and that identification then finds your payment credential that's stored remotely or maybe somewhere else, and it uses that for payment. And a good example of that, it was just announced, I think it was last week, Google announced hands-free payment. And I don't know if anyone read that, but hands-free payment is an example whereby you register as a consumer, you take a picture of yourself, you register into this service, and if you go to a participating merchant, you just walk up to this store and say, I want to pay with hands-free payment. It identifies your picture, and it can now figure out who you are using that facial recognition and your voice, and and then it will find the corresponding payment credentials in the cloud and use that for payment, right? So it's an interesting experience. You don't take out your chip card, you don't take out your phone, you simply walk up to the terminal, talk to it, maybe it takes a picture of you, and that's it, right? So these experiences you're gonna start to see in some marketplaces, and they're gonna be adopted by merchants that wanna create a unique experience, right? And so it's truly gonna be driven now by merchants. What type of experience do they wanna recreate for their consumers? Do they think that hands-free payment is intriguing or not? And we will see implementations of this all around the world in small pockets, right? It'll be 1 or 2 merchants here and maybe small communities. But this will be a difficult piece to get globally adopted at scale because it's a completely different experience. So it means all cardholders would need to enroll and use this. There's a lot of security to get figured out once it does scale. So this is something that we will see in pockets, but not in a mass utility in the near future, right? So that's kind of biometrics and payments. I'm not sure if people agree or not, but that is kind of what we're seeing and what we're predicting from a global perspective. So now, obviously, as we start using biometrics for payments, the data becomes much more valuable. Because anytime we have we've proven over the years that criminals love our payment data because it is so valuable. And so one of the fears we all have is as biometrics are being used for payments, how do we make sure that they're safe and protected and they can't be stolen and then reused, right? So that concept of stealing a biometric and then trying to reuse it, we call that kind of spoofing, right? You're basically trying to imitate the real biometric. And so a lot of money and resources are being spent by the biometric firms to figure out how can we detect the actual live biometric with a stolen copy, right? And so there's a number of things. One thing is called liveness detection. I don't know if you've heard of that, but liveness detection would be whereby I need to prove that I'm alive. I maybe need to move my face, or I maybe need to check the pulse in my finger, or check that I have blood flowing through my veins. There's a number of ways to test for liveness, but this is gonna be a key research area so that when we are using biometrics for payments, if it is stolen, we simply can't reuse that data, right? A huge opportunity for us to improve the security there. One thing also about biometrics, which is a little bit different, if this thing doesn't work, can we go to the next slide? Okay. One thing that is also kind of different about biometrics is that it's unlike a PIN. Oh, thank you. That's awesome. So unlike a PIN or a password, whereby it's just a yes or no, right? The PIN either matches or it doesn't. Biometrics aren't like that. There's a probabilistic model running behind the scene, and so it's not a yes or no answer. Biometrics, think of it as a scale from 0 to 100, and there's a percentage of likelihood of a match, right? And so obviously, if you had a 99% match, that would mean it's a pretty good confidence that the genuine consumer is representing and recreating their biometric. But it's difficult to manage the threshold because different biometrics, depending on how much time you're given to recapture the biometric, the accuracy rate can be higher or lower. And so there's a big trade-off. And what we're trying to do is figure out what is that trade-off. Like, if, for example, I don't know if anyone is using the fingerprint to get access to the phone, but sometimes it works really well. But if your finger is a little bit wet, it often doesn't work, right? And so that's an example of a false reject. Like, I'm the real person trying to get access to my phone, but I can't because it doesn't think it's me, right? So for whatever reason, the match that it's trying to do, it's not quite accurate. So we need to figure out what is that optimal balance of match, because otherwise we're going to have this concept of a lot of false acceptance, meaning the wrong consumer is getting access to the payment data, or the right consumer isn't getting the correct access at all. So this is something that we'll be working with a lot. But The reason why I mention this is because we view biometrics as just one more data point into a bigger holistic picture, right? So every time you use your Visa card, we analyze up to 500 different data points, and we look at all sorts of things, like what's the transaction characteristics, what's the cardholder profile, what's the merchant profile, what is the degree of match on biometric, right? So there's a number of different things we look at to determine, is this a genuine transaction with a genuine consumer or not? So biometrics to us is just one more data point into a broader layer of security. And this is something that we've been working on for over a decade now. A lot of the issuing banks in this marketplace know our core product, which is advanced authorization. But once again, every time you use that card, we look at up to 500 different points to determine what's the risk score, and we give that risk score to the bank, and they can say, yes, this is good, or no, this is bad. And so what we do, every year we rebuild these models, and we're looking for new data points that we can add to them so that the accuracy of the analytics is stronger. Well, I wanted to touch on briefly is, since we've been talking about biometrics, we think that's an entry point or a data point. The other piece that we're really focused on is mobile location, right? So last year we announced a service, mobile location confirmation, and it's a pretty simple service. We're simply matching the merchant location with where your cell phone is. And if the locations match, we send that match indicator to the bank and says, hey, the locations are good. If they don't match, then we say the locations don't match. So here's how it works. As a consumer, you download your mobile banking app from your bank, right? And all you have to do then, when you travel, you turn on your phone and you connect to Wi-Fi or you make a call, you turn on your phone figures out where you are. And so yesterday I flew from California, landed here in Brazil, I turned on my phone, Visa now knows that I'm in Sao Paulo. So when I pull out my Visa card and I use it to buy dinner, it matches in real time. The merchant is Sao Paulo, my phone is in Sao Paulo, it's a very low risk transaction. And I send that information to the issuing bank, and they can now confidently approve that transaction. And this was a big problem for us, it's a big problem for everyone. When we look at our transaction data, we see millions and millions of bad declines every year. A bad decline is the genuine consumer is traveling, they're trying to use their card, but the issuing bank declines it. And they generally decline it because of fraud reasons, for example. And so we looked at this data and said, how can we make this better? What incremental data can we add to give the issuers more confidence that this is a genuine transaction? So we started this, we launched it last year. It works today for the point of sale. So it's looking at where the merchant location is with where your phone is. We're in the process of now expanding that to e-commerce as well, so remote payments, right? So where is the device? What's the IP address location of the device that's being used, and where does that compare to the cardholder's cell phone, right? So there's lots of opportunities to use mobile location across the space. And we've had a number of different pilots with some banks around the world, and the results are fantastic. For one, the consumers like it because they're confident in giving that data to the bank for fraud detection purposes, right? The consumers know that the banks are looking out for them, trying to identify fraud, so they're comfortable giving that and sharing that information with the banks. So the results have been really good. We're trying to use that more and more, and in reality, what we're trying to do, a key strategy for us is, how do we get the cardholders more involved with payment processing? And it may sound a little bit weird, but when we have consumers who are actively monitoring their accounts, we see a 40% reduction in fraud losses on that account, which is significant, right? So if you could get a 40% reduction in fraud losses simply by having a cardholder sign up for transaction alerts, that can go a long way to your bottom line. And so we've been very focused lately on what type of experiences can we introduce to the cardholder so that they can more actively monitor and manage their accounts. So I think a lot of you have had transaction alerts for years. As a cardholder, you can sign up with your bank, you can see transaction alerts. What we're adding to that now is what we would call like spend controls or transaction controls. And a good example of this would be, let's say you've signed up for transaction alerts and you see a transaction that you don't recognize. Let's say you're here in this audience and you get an alert that says you just spent $200 online. And you said, no, I didn't. I'm right here in this conference room. I didn't do that. So today, what would you do? You'd have to pick up the phone and call your bank, right? There's nothing else to do. You'd say, hey, I just saw a transaction. I don't recognize it. Can we figure out what's going on? And so we look at that experience and we say, well, this day and age, why can't we just have the consumer notify the bank immediately through some type of web interface? And so what we're talking about is using your mobile device as a user interface into your card, right? So let's say now I got this alert on my mobile device. It says I just spent $200 and I didn't. I could now go to that mobile device and say, I want to suspend my card, right? Just stop this card. It seems something suspicious. And that would be an example of a transaction control that we've now given to the consumer, right? So once again, I just go to my mobile banking app. I say, suspend my card, future transactions would not go through, and then it gives you time then to go figure out what really happened. Was it a genuine transaction? Did my spouse buy something with my card without telling me, right? So if you find out it actually was legitimate, you could go back to your app and just say, oh, I want to activate my card again. It's all good, I'm ready to go. But there are many examples whereby you can really engage the consumer by providing these experiences through a mobile app. And that's really what our focus is getting geolocation, getting transaction alerts, getting transaction controls, getting biometrics, all of those experiences down to the mobile app so that then if we look at the payment life cycle, there's engagement opportunities before the transaction ever occurs, such as your spending controls, right? There's a lot of stuff we do during the transaction, right? The location monitoring, biometrics, the transaction analytics. And there's stuff we can do afterwards with alerts, right? So we're looking for many opportunities to truly engage the consumers so that they can actively get involved with payments. And the way that we see our role in doing that is simply providing these APIs and these capabilities to our banks, which you would then embed into your mobile banking app, right? Our key strategy is to have the issuer brand front and center. You do that through your mobile banking application, and we will help give guidance on what's the best experience and what's the best way to integrate that experience into your app. And the way that we've been doing it so far is in San Francisco, we have an innovation center, and so we'll send clients from around the world to the innovation center, and we will simply iterate with them over a couple of days to try to come up with the experience that we think is best for their cardholders. And so we're going to be doing this for the next 12, 24 months, and we're going to have a lot of best practices that we'll be able to share with you guys, and just as you guys are also doing a lot of this evaluation as well. And you'll be able to share what you're learning with us. So ultimately, this is what we're trying to go to get the cardholders more engaged because it can be so effective in our fight against fraud. All right? So I think I'm done. Let me sit.